Welcome to the Wife Stories YouTube channel. New video every day, and don't forget to subscribe. Here we go. I'm Brent Willis. At 29 years of age, I had a real problem, a cheating wife. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First, a disclaimer. I've never been good at English literature or social sciences. I'm a math, economics, and business guy. Don't get mad about my inability to use flowery language or provide tantalizing descriptions of people or events, because I'm just a facts-only type of guy. In addition to what I described above, I feel that I need to present my honest strengths and weaknesses without false modesty for the strengths and without downplaying or sugarcoating the weaknesses. I'm very good-looking, successful in business, trustworthy, and treat everyone with respect regardless of their station in life. I have almost always been honest. I'm a very considerate lover, putting my partner's satisfaction above mine. I am gentle during lovemaking. For 6 of the 7 women I have had intercourse with, I have always been told and believe that this is a real plus, and I left them well satisfied with every encounter. For one woman who really liked it rough, I was a major disappointment. Also, maybe because of some of the above characteristics, the parents of every woman I have dated have loved me. Sometimes I think that the mothers like me better than the daughters did. As far as my negatives are concerned, I am hopelessly unathletic and not very perceptive. I am easily emotionally hurt by others' negative comments or actions. I have a thin skin and often wear my emotions on my sleeve. Despite average physical strength and dexterity, I avoid physical confrontation and am not aggressive enough in any area of life except business and investing. Despite my lack of aggressiveness, I have a real vindictive streak for people who wrong me, and if there is no physical threat to me, I seek revenge. Details of my interaction with the 2 main characters in this tale, Melissa Thompson and Dorene Bronson, in the distant past would contribute nothing to this story and would bore you. So I'll make it quick and simple. I dated Melissa in college during my junior year, but we broke up just before summer. That was difficult for me but not devastating since it was basically mutual. She was more commitment averse than I was, but she never hid that from me or led me on. I met Dorene during the summer after my junior year. Melissa, Dorene, and I went to different high schools in the same metropolitan area and all attended the closest large state university. I dated Dorene exclusively during the summer and halfway through my senior year when Melissa popped back on the scene. I dated both of them. I didn't hide it from either until just before graduation when both gave me an ultimatum to choose. It was a difficult choice. Both are beautiful and sexy, but Melissa a little more so. Both really seem to be in love with me, but Dorene a little more so. Both are smart and come from good families. Although it didn't make a difference, Melissa's family is extremely rich, while Dorene's is upper middle class. Sex with both of them was great, probably a little more satisfying for me with Melissa, although it seemed from Melissa's standpoint the sex was a 9 out of 10, whereas from Dorene's it was a 10. Dorene was always candid about everything. Melissa was significantly less candid, although I never caught her in any major lie. I chose Melissa. Dorene was devastated and didn't even attend the graduation ceremony. I heard from friends that she moved out of the area shortly after graduation. I also met with Dorene's parents, Tom and Lydia Bronson, when I broke up with her since I had established a good relationship with them. They knew how sincere my affection for Dorene had been and what a hard decision it was for me, and we parted on good terms. Melissa and I got married 6 months after graduation and lived in the same metropolitan area that we grew up in a condo purchased by her parents, Jack and Carolyn Thompson, as a wedding present. Melissa's parents really liked me, even more so than most of the other parents of women that I dated. Melissa's mother, Carolyn, always greeted me warmly and bragged about me to her friends in front of me. Melissa's father, Jack, not only liked me, but was very impressed with my business acumen. He wanted me to come to work for one of the companies he owned, but I told him that I wanted to keep my business life separate from his and make my own way. I didn't ever want anyone to suggest that I got promotions or responsibilities just because I was the son-in-law. Even though I never worked for him, after 2 years of marriage to his daughter, Jack insisted that I have power of attorney over Melissa's trust fund, somewhere around $15 million since she had no business acumen whatsoever. The trust fund money would be hers once she turned 30, but I was in charge of every part of it except for about $3 million of preferred stock in one of Jack's companies, which could not be touched until Melissa was 32, and even after that, there were restrictions. Married life agreed with me despite finding out some things about Melissa that during our courtship I had never observed. Not surprising considering my lack of perceptiveness. She was more materialistic and much more concerned with her status in the community than I realized before marriage. In fact, how she was viewed by rich, successful, and high society people in our metropolitan area was one of the most important things in life to her. Despite revelations about Melissa that were of some concern, I was happy in our marriage. Melissa seemed to be there for me when I needed her, such as vigilantly standing by me when my parents, my only relatives that I cared about, were killed in a car crash after we had been married 3 years. The money I got from my parents' estate after taxes and expenses were paid I put in an offshore account. I never told Melissa about it, and she never asked. It wasn't money that we needed to have the lifestyle that we wanted, but it was a significant amount of money, on the order of $1 million. I intended to tell her about placing it in an offshore account, but never got around to it. Maybe there was a Freudian reason that I didn't. I don't really know. When Melissa and I just turned 29, our birthdays were only 3 days apart. We decided that she would go off the pill and we start a family, something that we always agreed upon since we got engaged. Even as unperceptive as I normally am, it seemed to me that when she did go off the pill, her libido increased. Her libido had always been what I considered normal, given my experience with the other 6 women that I had had sexual relations with before marriage. So we normally had very good sex 3 or 4 times a week. After she went off the pill, it seemed that she got more sexually aggressive and vigorous during sex, and our frequency increased to 5 or 6 times a week. Despite the fact that she went off the pill, she didn't get pregnant right away. We both understood that it would likely be at least a couple of months before she would conceive, so it didn't concern either of us. As I previously mentioned, I treat everyone with respect, which made me popular with the employees of the country club that Melissa, me, Jack, and Carolyn belonged to. I didn't really golf or play tennis much because I simply don't have the requisite hand-eye coordination, but I did enjoy meals there, swimming, and playing cards. Several of the employees liked and trusted me enough to come to me with business problems, and I always did my best to help them out. Perhaps the employee that I was most friendly with was Jasper, the captain of waiters in the golf grill. One Saturday morning at the club, pursuant to our standard procedure, Melissa went off to her golf lesson while I intended to go swimming and relax by the pool since the week had been particularly stressful at work. I got delayed in conversation with a few people, and as I approached the locker room, Jasper came up to me with a very concerned look on his face. "Brent," he said, "I insisted that all of the employees call me by my first name, although Melissa wanted them to call her Mrs. Willis. Could I talk to you for a second?" "Sure," I replied, expecting it to be about some financial issue that he had. Jasper led me into a private alcove, got a tear in his eye, and with concern I asked, "What's wrong?" He blurted out, "I hate to have to tell you this, Brent, but your wife is cheating on you even as we speak." "What?" I gasped. I'd suspected it for 2 weeks, but I confirmed it today. She's with Jeremy, the assistant golf pro, in massage room A. Apparently, the lock on the door is broken, but they don't know it. I opened up by mistake and saw them, although they didn't see me. Go look now. I'm sure the color drained from my face, and I almost fell to my knees. I had to hold on to a chair back for a few seconds to regain my balance. Being confrontation averse, there was no way that I would challenge Melissa if I caught them, but I had to know. I briskly walked to massage room, which had a do not disturb sign on the door. I cracked it open. The lock didn't work just as Jasper said. There was Melissa on her hands and knees on the massage table with Jeremy's tool in her while she moaned, "Harder, Dewey, harder." Before I closed the door, I did notice that he had a condom on, but my vision quickly became blurry after that. After I closed the door, I collapsed onto the floor. My mind was in turmoil. To say that I was devastated would be the understatement of the decade. I finally regained enough awareness to realize that I needed to get out of there. As I hurriedly exited the building, I went past Jasper and was able to cough out, "Thanks for telling me. But do not tell anyone else under any circumstances, please, before tears formed in my eyes. Jasper replied with real concern in his voice, "You got it, sorry man." I drove in a fog until I came across a bar that was open. It was a relatively high-class bar in a nice part of town, actually the suburb that Dorene's parents lived in near some restaurants and clubs. I almost never drank hard liquor, and rarely more than 2 glasses of wine a day if I drank at all. I got absolutely plastered sitting at a table by myself in a corner of the bar. By the time that I stumbled out of the bar, it was dark, and I was beyond drunk. My plan was to get into my car without a seatbelt on and crash it into a brick wall and kill myself. I obviously was overlooking the airbag. The last thing that I remember is falling down. I only know what happened in the next 12 hours from what other people told me. I awoke in strange surroundings. It looked like a guest room in a residence. I was dressed in the same clothes that I was wearing when I left the country club. I had a splitting headache and otherwise felt horrible. Unfortunately, I had not forgotten the reason for my malaise, so I felt worse emotionally than I did physically. I slowly walked out of the room I was in, found a bathroom, and after relieving myself, looked in the mirror. I looked as bad as I felt, including having a large bump and scrape on my noggin. I thought that I recognized the second-floor hallway that I was in, but couldn't place it. I heard sounds of meal preparation and people talking on the first floor, so I stumbled down the stairs. I was shocked to see Dorene's parents, Tom and Lydia Bronson, in the kitchen. "Well, Brent, glad to see that you're among the living," Tom said, peering at me over his reading glasses and putting down his newspaper. "Hi, Brent. Breakfast will be ready shortly," Lydia chirped from near the stove. "Tom, Lydia, I have no idea how I got here," I mumbled. "Have a seat, Brent," Tom said, getting up and helping me into one of the kitchen chairs, "and I'll tell you the story." "Thanks, because I have no recollection of anything after I left the bar during what I presume was last night and was trying to find my car," I mumbled. Tom proceeded to relate the story with Lydia occasionally throwing a comment out. Basically, Tom and Lydia were going to meet some friends at a restaurant about a block from the bar I came out of. As they walked toward the restaurant, they saw the guy fall and hit his head on the sidewalk and went over to help. When they determined that it was me, Lydia went to get their friends. They and their friends helped me to their car and drove me to their house, canceling their dinner plans and getting takeout with their friends instead. "I'm so grateful that you helped me out," I said. "I'm particularly grateful that you brought me here instead of to a drunk tank or a hospital." As Lydia brought some pancakes and juice to the table, she replied, "Considering what you were mumbling, we thought it best to just bring you here. Get some food in you, you need it." "What did I say?" I asked, completely perplexed. "That can wait until after breakfast," Lydia responded while dishing me a stack of hotcakes. At breakfast, the three of us talked about a number of things, but not about the previous night. Of course, I inquired about Dorene, and they told me that she had been married for 3 years but was now divorced and had moved back to the area and lived only about 10 miles away. She was a successful entrepreneur. "Is she still as beautiful as she was in college?" I asked wistfully. "You'll have to judge that for yourself. She'll be here shortly," Tom replied. "What?" I yelped. "She can't see me like this." "She won't mind," Lydia nonchalantly replied. "She's anxious to see you, especially if what you mumbled last night is true." When breakfast was finished, and after I helped clear the table, the three of us went and sat in their living room. "What did I say last night?" I sheepishly asked. "There's no reason to relate everything," Tom said pensively. "Let me just hit the highlights, rather lowlights. Your wife Melissa was cheating on you. There is no way that you'd start a family under those circumstances. You drank hard liquor for the first time in 2 years to drown your sorrows, and you were planning on killing yourself. Does that about sum it up, Lydia?" "Those are the lowlights," Lydia responded with a bemused look on her face. I buried my head in my hands. After a minute or so, I raised my head. "I'm so sorry to burden you with my problems," I said on the verge of tears. "I really don't know what I'm going to do, but I likely would have killed myself last night if I had been able to get to my car. I think that you need to know that I'm very emotional," I continued, choking up. "Sensitive, a quality that I've always admired in you, Brent, but maybe too sensitive for your own good," Lydia said, walking over to me and holding my hand. After we talked in generalities for a few more minutes, the front door opened and in walked Dorene. Except for a streak of blonde in her hair, Dorene looked virtually no different than she did the last time that I saw her 8 years ago. If anything, she looked slightly better. I was very nervous about what her reaction to me would be. I got the most pleasant surprise of my life. "Hi, Brent," she said in a voice so cheery that it seemed that me breaking up with her 8 years ago had never happened. "You look like hell," she giggled, "but I still need a hug." She held up her hands. I took them. She pulled me up off the couch, and she gave me a sincere, tight hug. After a few seconds of apprehension, I hugged her back and then started sobbing. Lydia broke the tension. "I think that you two have some catching up to do. Tom and I have plans to go to the mall to shop. We'll be back in 2 hours," Lydia said, squeezing my shoulder. I seriously doubt that Tom had been planning on going shopping on Sunday morning and early afternoon, but he pretended like that was the most fun thing ever, and off they went. As soon as they left, Dorene cut right to the chase. "Brent, you know that we've both always been straight with each other. Is there any reason for that to change now?" After a slight pause, staring into Dorene's beautiful hazel eyes, I hesitantly said, "No, I really need a friend now. Someone that I can be candid with and open up to." "Good," she said with a grin. "Let me start. My marriage ended because my husband cheated on me. I can't blame him too much, however, because I'm sure that he sensed that there was only one man that I ever loved or likely would ever love, and it wasn't him. It was you. From what my parents tell me, I may have a chance to get you back, and if I do, I intend to take full advantage of it. I don't think that I would have been more stunned than if I had been hit by the electrodes of a taser. I'm sure that my mouth was agape and my eyes the size of baseballs as I remained speechless for what seemed like a long time, all the while staring into Dorene's eyes while she returned my stare. Finally, she broke the silence. "Is that direct enough for you?" she asked with a crooked smile. "Yeah, I'd say that that was definitely direct enough," I cackled. "Seems like I made the wrong choice 8 years ago," I continued. "That's the right attitude. Now let's figure this thing out." Dorene continued with a big grin. "Let's sit at the kitchen table and make notes about how things proceed from here." And so into the kitchen we went. Dorene got a legal pad and pen out of a drawer in the den, and we got down to business. Apparently, I had been soul-bearing the previous night when in my drunken stupor because Dorene seemed to know all of the salient details of my situation. I just clarified a few things for her. I did make it clear in our discussions that I wanted to get the ultimate revenge on Melissa regardless of what else we did, and wanted to get as far away from her as possible. By the time that Tom and Lydia had gotten back 2 hours and 2 full pots of coffee for Dorene and me later, Dorene and I had the basics of a plan on how to proceed. In making the plan, I had constantly reiterated my need for ultimate revenge and to get out of my marriage. She told me that she'd do anything to help as long as I ended up with her, and the ideas gushed out. We each made a to-do list, a list of things to avoid, and a list of possible major pitfalls. We promised to meet for lunch every other day to refine things and see how we stood in completing our assigned tasks. There were only 2 people that we really needed to trust. Tom and Lydia, well, maybe Jasper too. Neither of us had any problem with trusting Tom and Lydia, and they were honored to be taken into our confidence. We told them only as much as we needed to. I believed that I could trust Jasper also. The most immediate problem was to explain to Melissa how and why I had been gone since yesterday early afternoon, now an expanse of more than 24 hours. Since I looked like hell, including the bump and scrape on my head from passing out on the sidewalk, we were confident that it was Dole. Dorene drove me to where I had left my car. Fortunately, it was undisturbed. I had left my cell phone in the car. I checked the messages on my cell phone, which included 10 from Melissa and 1 from her father, Jack. The first one chronologically was from Jasper. "Hey Brent," Jasper said, "just thought that I'd let you know that I saw Melissa. She asked if I had seen you. I told her that you had an emergency come up and looked all around for her, including on the driving range and course, but that you couldn't find her or Jeremy, so you took off with instructions for me to tell her that you'd be in touch as soon as your emergency was resolved and to take a cab home. She had a very distressed look, but bought my story completely. Good luck, man, and let me know if there is something that I can do to help. The messages from Melissa and Jack were all about the same, with increasing levels of concern about my whereabouts. Dorene and I decided that I would call Melissa and tell her that I had been mugged and had been taken without ID to a clinic and that I would be home in an hour or so. I placed the call. Melissa sounded frantic when she answered the phone and relieved. I cut the call short. Dorene and I kissed. Not a full-blown passionate one, but not just a good friend's kiss either. I need to remain true to Melissa until our plan plays out, I told Dorene. That doesn't surprise me, Dorene said with a big smile. Once it does play out, however, I'm going to screw you to death, she chuckled. Woe is me, I dramatically replied. My only concern is if you can act properly with Melissa in a way that doesn't raise her suspicions. Dorene said. That's my major concern too, I replied, given how emotional I am. But you've given me the courage to do it since I know that there's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. I'll find a way, I said with a determined look on my face. Dorene smiled. We exchanged one more quick kiss, and I was off, first to buy some Plan B pills and a burner phone at the pharmacy and then home. Melissa and her parents were bordering on hysterical when I got home. My appearance gave them no reason to doubt my story about the mugging since my head injury was real, my clothes dirty and disheveled, and my hair a mess. I had hidden my wallet in the car and would pretend that I had to get new credit cards and a new driver's license since they had been stolen, although thankfully my car keys had not been. Having Melissa's parents there helped. I may not have been able to pull it off if they hadn't been there since my anger boiled to just below the surface when I saw Melissa, but I remained relatively calm and played the disordered story victim to the hilt. Considering her activities on Saturday, I was really quite surprised that Melissa appeared very sincere in her concern for me, and there is no doubt that she had not slept the night before. She looked almost as bad as I did. Her parents decided to stay overnight. After Melissa and I showered and had a dinner that her mother Carolyn cooked, we more passed out than went to sleep. My skin almost crawled as she lay her head on my shoulder, but I sucked it up, and within minutes I was in Never Never Land. Over the next 3 weeks, things progressed basically as Dorene and I planned. Dorene was as diligent as anyone that I have ever seen in accomplishing her tasks. After 2 lunch meetings with her, there was no doubt in my mind that I should have married her instead of Melissa. All my old feelings for her returned in spades, and I was blown away by her devotion, competency, and efficiency. There was much to do, and things were complex. Since I was having difficulty interacting with Melissa, I wanted to stay on schedule regardless of many minor setbacks. In order not to raise suspicions and to accommodate her enhanced libido, I even had sex with Melissa 8 times. Each time, I fantasized that it was Dorene. In the morning after each session, I crushed up a Plan B pill and included it in the breakfast that I lovingly made for Melissa and watched her to make sure that she ate it before I left for work. There is no way in the world that I wanted a child with her. It sounds strange considering how horribly upset and devastated I was when I witnessed Melissa's cheating, but 3 Saturdays after that terrible event, I was hoping that Melissa would be cheating again. I needed her to be in order to execute my plan. Using the burner phone that I had purchased at the same time as the Plan B pills, I called Dorene first thing Saturday morning to ensure that everything was on track. It was. I kissed Melissa for the last time as we parted on Saturday morning at the country club. She'd go to her golf lesson and me to swim. I tracked down Jasper, got his pledge not to ever tell anyone that he had told me about Melissa's cheating or that I witnessed it 3 weeks earlier, and gave him $10,000 in cash. After a delay of about 20 minutes more, I surreptitiously removed the Do Not Disturb sign from massage room A and made sure that the lock was still broken and that Melissa and Jeremy were inside. Then I enlisted the help of the director of the club training facility and the head golf pro, ostensibly to find Melissa, frantically telling them I had a real emergency. I maneuvered the other 2 so that the head golf pro opened the door to the massage room. As expected, there was assistant golf pro Jeremy screwing Melissa doggy style again. I noticed a condom. Thank God for small favors. The head golf pro blurted out, "What the hell?" The director of the training facility gasped loudly, and I yelled, "Melissa." The copulating couple looked at us with completely startled and chagrined faces. Melissa screamed. Jeremy quickly pulled out and tried to pull up his pants, which were bunched around his ankles. I got a totally distraught look on my face, not hard to do considering the circumstances and certainly not requiring any acting on my part, and then turned and ran sobbing. The sobbing was an act, although inside my heart was bleeding. As I exited the area of the training facility, I heard the head golf pro shrieking at Jeremy. I quickly drove home and left my already prepared note with my wedding ring on the kitchen table. I also left my regular cell phone there since I did not want to take the chance that it could be used to track me. I had had the low jack on both my car and my laptop computer disabled 2 weeks earlier. My laptop computer and a suitcase with the only possessions that I valued, some mementos of my parents and a few changes of underwear and socks, were already in the trunk of my car. My note read, "I loved you more than life itself. I can't live with your betrayal. God save my soul." I don't know how Melissa got home so quickly, but she got there before I left. I would rather not have seen her, but it may actually have worked out for the best as far as partially satisfying my need for revenge was concerned. Melissa was genuinely panic-stricken. She kept grabbing me, I kept pulling away. She kept trying to make eye contact, I avoided it. She yelled things like, "Going off the pill made me too horny. My hormones are all screwed up. It was just sex. I made him always use a condom. I need to have your baby. And what will my parents say if you leave me?" The only thing I said in response to all of her hysterical rants was a genuinely emotional, choking reply to the last question. "Tell them that you killed our love and me." There were tears in my eyes as I pushed her away from me, then ran out the door. One part of my revenge required me to act on Monday in order to ensure that it was complete, since for most institutions, money transfers can't reliably be confirmed on the weekends. Dorene rented a hotel room in her name in a busy part of town, and I parked my car at a remote part of another hotel lot about a block from the one that she and I stay in Saturday and Sunday nights. Although Dorene and I slept together and were affectionate during our 2 nights in the hotel, we didn't have sex. I needed to ostensibly die before that could happen, but knew that it would be passionately over the top once that occurred. Pursuant to her plan, I changed my appearance as best that I reasonably could in the time available. Dorene cut my hair much shorter than I usually wear it, dyed it blonde, and styled it differently. I put on blue contacts to hide my normally green eyes and plain plastic lens glasses. I applied a fake professional blonde mustache that looked entirely real, and I wore clothes that Dorene had purchased for me that were vastly different than the type that I normally wore. Dorene and I went to a movie Saturday and Sunday nights in a theater adjacent to the hotel, ate most of our meals via room service, and went over our plans again and again so that we knew every detail by heart. Monday morning, I made electronic transfers of the assets worth approximately $12 million in Melissa's trust fund that I legitimately had complete control over to 6 different charities that Dorene and I had obtained all of the necessary electronic transfer information for. 5 of the transfers went through. The 6th did not, and there was no time to try and get information about another charity, so the 5 transfers would have to do. One of the 6 charities was one that Dorene had set up several years ago, and which she still had operative control of. After we made the transfers and got confirmation that they had been completed, Dorene drove me to my car. That's when there was a major glitch in our plans. I underestimated the resolve and influence of my father-in-law. Apparently, he had virtually every law enforcement officer in the city looking for my car, because when we got to it, there was a squad car sitting right next to it with a policeman inside. We needed my car because it had been specially modified to execute the major part of our plan. We had made some contingency plans, including purchasing a disguise for Dorene and a backup disguise for me. Dorene's nimble mind immediately came up with a solution. She put on her disguise, ran up to the squad car, and frantically told the officer, "There's a guy in the hotel lobby with a gun." The policeman immediately got on his radio and then laid rubber driving from the remote area of the lot where my car was parked and toward the front entrance of the hotel. As soon as he was out of sight, I ran to my car, hopped in, and Dorene, and I took off for the remote coastal mountain road where I had modified the guardrail. As I drove to my suicide spot with Dorene following behind me, I pushed a button on my laptop which sent off all of the emails that Dorene and I had carefully written over the past 3 weeks. The emails were staged so that one would be sent every few minutes. It took about an hour for us to get to our desired location, and by then all of the emails would have been delivered. Dorene did a great job of crafting the emails while still using some of my catchphrases and other writing idiosyncrasies so that it would appear that they came from me yet were much more succinct and effective. The emails basically said that I was too weak a person to overcome the betrayal occasioned by my wife's extramarital sex and apologized for ending my life without personally saying goodbye. The emails included statements of the pain and anguish that I felt much more effectively than I would have been able to execute, although the statements did 95% accurately express my real feelings. The email to my father-in-law, Jack, was most poignant. I apologized to him that my need for both suicide and revenge was so great that I breached his confidence in me by emptying Melissa's trust fund and hoped that he could find it in his heart to eventually forgive me. The suicide spot had been carefully selected. There was a sheer drop-off from a mountain road to a part of the ocean that had severe but constantly changing undertows. The most ingenious investigator would conclude that no one could survive the fall off the cliff and that the person's body might never be found, and certainly there was no way to accurately predict where it might end up if not beaten to pieces by wave and rock action or consumed by sea creatures. A few days earlier, I had put acid on the bolts at one part of the guardrail at the suicide spot, and then another material that could simulate natural corrosion. My car had been modified so that by remote control, the accelerator rod within the engine compartment would be thrust forward, but when it reached its end of travel, it would actuate a small explosive device that would likely destroy it. Dorene and I parked our cars on the shoulder of the road at the suicide spot. We looked with binoculars until we were quite certain that there were no other vehicles within sight. Then I positioned my car so that it was facing the guardrail and about 30 meters away from the area where the guardrail bolts had been weakened. I actuated the remote control so that the vehicle accelerated. There was just enough momentum when my car hit the weakened guardrail to break through and fall off the cliff, landing in the ocean hundreds of feet below. Dorene and I had also disabled the driver's side airbag of my car and had impregnated the part of the leather wrapping on the steering wheel where my head would hit in an accident with my blood and tissue. We also put my fresh blood on the steering wheel leather wrap but had impregnated it to be sure that some would remain in case the fresh blood was washed away by ocean wave action. The car windows were open, and the seat belt was not attached. My wallet was loose in the car so that it would be sure to float out of it at some point and hopefully would be retrieved by divers. As soon as we saw the car hit the water, we got into Dorene's car and took off. We drove 400 miles away that day and 400 more the next, paying for everything with cash until we got to our initial destination city where Dorene had made arrangements to pick up a document helping to establish my new identity. We spent the first 2 whole days and 3 nights at our initial destination city in our hotel room. This time, we weren't just ordering room service. We were making love passionately. I expected my traumatic experience with Melissa to stifle my sexual abilities for a while. In actuality, the opposite was true. It was in large part due to Dorene's absolute devotion to me, as she clearly demonstrated by the excellent planning and execution of my escape and how sexy she was. I quickly found out that not only had Dorene become slightly better looking over the last 8 years, but that she had become significantly more passionate. So much so that our first time together, I broke from my normal tender lovemaking and we made love intensely. After that, we alternated between gentle loving and animalistic passion more times in 2 days and 3 nights than I thought was humanly possible, at least for me. We were both completely sore and barely able to even walk or pee without pain. Before we left our hometown, Dorene had obtained a certified copy of a birth certificate from a child by the name of Alex Simmons. Alex was born in a rural area without computer records just a year before I was and had died shortly after his birth. At our initial destination city, using a photograph with my new appearance, we purchased a customized counterfeit Australian passport in Alex Simmons' name. Dorene had determined that Australian passports were some of the easiest to forge and 2 weeks ago had located an expert forger in our initial destination city. My counterfeit passport was perfect. It even had fake trip stamps, to and from Thailand and 2 other Asian countries, a fake stamp indicating entry into the U.S. a month ago, and a broken-in look to it. It would readily support my story that I was a Native American who had moved to Australia as a child and was now returning with my new birth certificate and passport in hand. We leisurely drove to our final destination city on the opposite coast from our hometown. We made a point of being intimate in every state that we traversed, even if it was for just an hour in Motel 6. When we got to our final destination city, we rented an apartment and finalized plans to start our new life together. I had already transferred the money that I had inherited from the offshore account in Brent Willis' name into a new offshore account in the name of Alex Simmons. Using my birth certificate and the Australian Alex Simmons passport, I was able to set up a U.S. bank account and transfer some money from the offshore account into it. Within 6 weeks, I had a driver's license, credit cards, and every other normal piece of identification one would expect. Within 6 months, Alex Simmons had a U.S. passport. During our trip escaping my former life, we regularly checked in with Dorene's parents and also checked internet sources for stories about Brent Willis. Things were grim for Melissa. Within a week of my suicide, my car had been retrieved from the ocean using a barge with a crane. Divers had found my wallet, and almost everyone I knew had been interviewed, and my financial records combed. Since in the 3 weeks before my demise, I had only gotten $30,000 in cash, all in transactions that seemed mostly legitimate and not actual cash transactions, that was not an unduly high amount considering my lifestyle. And since there was absolutely no activity of any kind in any of my bank, credit card, or brokerage accounts, it was assumed that I was dead. My death was confirmed shortly thereafter by scientific testing of my vehicle. Technicians recovered my blood and tissue from the leather wrapping on the steering wheel. The intentionally clumsy on my part, disabling of the driver's side airbag in my car, plus my suicide note for Melissa and suicide emails to all my acquaintances left no doubt in the public's mind that I had committed suicide. From everything that I had gathered, public condemnation of Melissa and Jeremy was extraordinarily harsh. Of course, Jeremy immediately lost his job, and all indications were that the head pro at the country club would make sure that he never got another golfing-related job anywhere in the United States. He was reported to have left town within a week of being caught with Melissa. Melissa was a pariah in high society circles. She even suffered the indignity of being expelled from the country club, even though she would certainly have resigned on her own. Attempts by local reporters to interview her were unsuccessful, and there was no indication that she ever left what used to be our condo. One unfortunate part of the execution of my plan was what it did to Jack and Carolyn, Melissa's parents. I always knew that they liked me, but I didn't realize that they loved me as a son. One quote from Jack in the city's biggest newspaper reduced me to tears. "Our loving son is dead, betrayed by his wife. Please respect our privacy and let us grieve for our terrible loss." Dorene and I had just started our new life in our apartment when Tom and Lydia informed us that there was going to be a memorial service for me arranged by Jack and Carolyn. Although it was still long before I could legally be declared dead, there was no one who didn't believe that I had committed suicide. Dorene decided that she would attend the service and flew back from our new city to her hometown. When Dorene returned, I could tell that she was holding something about the ceremony back from me. She tried to be flippant about it, but I wouldn't have it. After a couple of days of me pestering her in tears, she told me about how awful it was. People that I didn't even recognize apparently cared that much about me. It was a very solemn event. Jack broke down several times trying to deliver a eulogy, which had to be finished by his brother. Carolyn looked like death, mourned over and quietly sobbed throughout the entire service. Melissa was not in attendance. She was reported to be in a mental health facility. Not only would no attempt be made by Melissa's family to recover the $10 million that I sent to charities from Melissa's trust fund, but the family gave $2 million more, the amount that I intended to send but wasn't able to another charity in my name. My memorial service was 4 years ago. I was legally declared dead 2 years after it. Dorene and I married as soon as Brent Willis was declared dead. We are now Mr. and Mrs. Simmons. When we got married, we already had a little girl, and we now have a little boy on the way. Dorene and I have no money problems. In addition to my inheritance, We have the money from the sale of Dorene's business to her employees and the salary that we get from the charity we work for. Ever since the charity that Dorene set up got their $2 million donation, they have had enough money to hire her as the full-time operations director and me as the financial director and investment counselor. Through the charity, we have been able to help hundreds of underprivileged families and get great satisfaction from our work, including by increasing our outreach every year. Tom retired, and he and Lydia moved to a place only about 15 miles from our house in order to be near us, and especially their granddaughter and their grandson-to-be. I love Dorene more than I ever loved Melissa, and she loves me more than Melissa ever did. That makes me feel guilty that I didn't choose her after college. The entire mess with Melissa and her family could have been avoided. I stopped trying to find out what had happened to Melissa, Jack, and Carolyn. The news was never good and just enhanced my guilt. The last that I heard, Jack and Carolyn had established a scholarship in my name at the college that Melissa, Dorene, and I had attended, and Melissa had gotten out of the mental health institution after 6 months of treatment and moved away. Dorene and I could not be happier with each other and our life together, except for one thing. We could not have more guilt than what we feel for how absolutely successfully my revenge was executed. We now know that not even guilty Melissa, let alone innocent Jack and Carolyn, deserved what we did to them. I wish that I was not such a coward and had confronted Melissa and divorced her. What ifs are a witch?